Welcome to today's webinar, the overview of new Phase 4 regulations for all businesses. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. My name is Isaac Reichman. I am the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. I have been and we have been hosting webinars throughout the reopening plan to help businesses understand the new regulations and how to follow them. Today's webinar will be recorded, so if you are unable or any of your colleagues are unable to attend this webinar, it is being recorded and it will be posted on our website at chicago.gov/businesseducation. We hope to have it up and running by up by tomorrow. Hopefully it will be posted there, and then you can share that link with others as well. We do have a high number of attendees here today, which is great news. I'm glad to see a lot of people joining in order to get this very important information. So we will have time for questions. I ask that if you have questions, please use the chat function on WebEx. Again, please use the function labeled chat if you have questions. Depending on what the questions are, I will pause a little bit throughout the presentation to answer questions, and I'll make sure to leave some time to answer your questions. I may not, however, get to every single question, which is why you'll see on the bottom of every page an email address. That's bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. I'm going to type it into the chat box as well, so that you can just copy and paste that email address. If you have any questions related to reopening or business licensing, anything like that, please email bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, I may not get to every question, or there may be something that requires me to consult with our health department or with the Department of Buildings, another city department, and I ask that you please email those questions to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Great, so what are we going to cover today? Today we're going to be discussing Phase 4 of Chicago's reopening framework entitled Gradually Resume. Specifically, we're going to be discussing the announcement made yesterday of a series of changes in the reopening framework that will come into effect on this Thursday, October 1st at 5 a.m. So again, we're still a part of Phase 4, the Gradually Resume phase. However, we're going to have some tweaks to that phase that come into effect this Thursday. So a little bit about today's presentation. I'll start by providing an update on the data. Then I'll talk about the changes to the Phase 4 guidelines. I'll provide an overview of all of the guidelines, and I will then talk a little bit about enforcement and operational requirements. Okay. So I'm going to leave this up for just a second. This is a little bit of the metrics that the health department has been using throughout the throughout Phase 4 Gradually Resume, which started on June 26th. You'll hear a lot of different metrics thrown around, and I do want to tell you that there are a number of different metrics that the health department is using in order to determine what the regulations are. These include cases, hospitalizations, deaths, COVID emergency department visits, positivity rate, hospital system capacity, testing capacity, and response capacity. So specifically, we're looking at these metrics to see whether they are increasing, if there's a sustained increase for over 14 days, or if they are stable and or decreasing, particularly for over a 4-week, 28-day period. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the metrics for the next couple slides and why we're ready for this change. I do want to preface and say I am not the Department of Public Health. I got these slides from the health department, but I am not by no means the health expert. So if anyone has any detailed questions about these metrics, I'll be happy to connect you with someone in the health department, but I may not have the answer right now. However, I do want to make it clear that we have seen a series of important and positive trends over the last 28 days, which is why we were ready for this announcement yesterday and to move into some easing of restrictions this Thursday. But I do want to make it clear that we are by no means out of the woods. We still have about 300 cases a day, as you can see on this next slide. Now, that has gone down from our peak towards the end and beginning of August, but we're still at about 300 cases a day. Our current number is 299 new cases a day. Back at the end of June, we were under 200 for a short period, but we're back up to 300 cases. Now, that is lower than it was, and it is going down, but we are still at 300 cases a day, which is all to say we are still in the midst of this crisis, and it's why it's so important to follow these guidelines closely. Here it shows you what has happened since we have reopened as a part of phase 4. So as you can see, when phase 4 started, we did see a gradual but consistent increase in cases, which peaked at around the middle of August, and that it has since been going down over the last month, which is why we're ready for this next phase. So here's a closer view of our cases during phase 4 that we have been stable or decreasing for over 28 days, which is why we're ready to move forward. Additionally, hospitalizations have been stable or decreasing. New hospitalizations have been stable or decreasing since August 27th. That's over 28 days, only 14 new hospitalizations per day. Consistently, and this is great news, our deaths since June have been either stable or declining. Really, as you can see from our peak back really in April and May, it has declined and declined steadily, and we're only averaging about 3 deaths per day. Emergency department visits during phase 4 for anyone with COVID-like illness since August 30th. This is what the health department uses for like an urgent, even before people have been tested, urgently and quickly be able to tell whether someone has COVID-like symptoms. That has been going down since August 30th as well. It's about 45 emergency department visits per day. Test positivity had risen to above 5% pretty consistently in August, and it is back down to 4.3%. It has been stable or decreasing for 14 to 28 days, which is the goal that we had set. Hospital capacity, which is great news, has been looking great really back since April, which is, again, very, very good news. Our goal, as you can see, we're way below our goal in hospital non-ICU beds, ICU beds, and ventilator use. Testing capacity has also gone way up. Our goal is to have 4,500 or more tests per day. As you can see, there was a little dip. That's during Labor Day week, but we have over 8,000 tests per day, which is way above our goal, which again is great news. So all this is to say, and why I want to make sure to lead with the health metrics, is that we are very much using the health metrics to determine what these changes are. So effective Thursday, October 1st at 5 a.m., the following new regulations will come into effect. And I'm going to go over each one of these in detail later on in this presentation. First, increased indoor capacity. Capacity will be increased from 25% to 40%. Any place that has been limited to 25% indoor capacity can now open up at 40% capacity. However, the maximum of 50 people in a room or space will be maintained. Taverns can reopen inside. So that's breweries, taverns, bars. Any other establishment that serves alcohol without a food license may reopen with indoor capacity. These will be at 25% or 50 people, whichever is fewer. So as you know, breweries, taverns, and bars without food have been closed since mid-July, but they can now reopen at 25% indoors. Additionally, bars, restaurants, and other establishments that sell alcohol for on-site or off-site consumption can now do so until 1 a.m. They had been limited to 11 p.m., and they can also stay open until 1:30. So last call at 1, close your doors at 1:30. This is up from last call at 11 and closing your doors at midnight. Increased group size, maximum group size for health and fitness classes and after-school programming will increase from 10 to 15 people. And I'll get into this in more detail, but importantly, you still have those same capacity restrictions of 40% and people need to be 6 feet apart, but you will be allowed to have a maximum of 15 people in these classes. Finally, facials, shaves, and other personal services that require the removal of face coverings will now be allowed. Now, we recognize, and the health department in particular, recognizes that these are very risky still. So we are recommending that you limit them to under 15 minutes. Now I'm going to talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. First, increased indoor capacity. Basically, the way, hopefully y'all are already aware of what your existing regulations are. All this is saying now is that capacity can increase from 25% to 40%. So establishments that had been limited to 25% can now expand to 40%. You still have the maximum of 50 people, and you still have all social distancing guidelines that have been in effect depending on your specific industry. So this applies to any place, again, that has been at 25%. Restaurants, non-essential retail, health and fitness centers, personal services, performance and event venues, movie theaters, museums, indoor recreation, higher ed classes, and faith-based services. They all had been limited to 25%. Effective Thursday can now operate at 40%. So again, whatever you did to calculate 25%, I know it's a little bit different in every different industry. Whatever you did to calculate 25%, you can now calculate at 40%. So again, the 50-person max remains in place. That means, unfortunately, for some large venues that were already at that 50-person max capacity, they will not be able to increase people at this point. So if 25% got you up to 50 people, which was the maximum, then you will not be able to expand with this. Again, 50 people max remains in place. And want to make clear with all of this, and I probably should have said this from the beginning, these regulations do remain, we do continue to analyze these regulations all the time, and we will be continuing to do so. We hope, and the health commissioner yesterday says, we hope to increase capacity beyond this to 50% and potentially even more than 50 people, hopefully by the end of October. But it all depends on what the data says. And it's all about easing, about turning a dimmer switch. That's why we're going to 40 at this point, and that's why we're keeping 50 people max in place. Additionally, and this is a new regulation that is formally in place, though I do hope everybody already had this set, all places of business are now required to provide hand sanitizer for patrons and employees to use upon entry. Again, this is something that I expect the vast majority of you are already doing, and it is something that we have been recommending since the beginning, but it is now a formal requirement as part of the regulations to provide hand sanitizer for patrons and employees to use upon entry. So that's our first new regulation. Our second is the reopening of taverns, bars, taverns, and breweries. And any establishment that has a liquor license, has an alcohol serving license, but does not have a retail food license, may now reopen for indoor service at 25% capacity or 50 people, whichever is fewer. A couple points about this. First of all, this is again for establishments that do not serve food and do not have a retail food license. A couple points about this. Outdoor service is still allowed and is still strongly encouraged. And we do have guidelines out there. Please let us know if you need these guidelines for how to operate safely outdoors. So outdoor service can continue at exactly what the rules, nothing has changed related to outdoor service. You do not have a formal capacity limit for outdoor service. Rather, you just are required to keep tables 6 feet apart. Additionally, as we have from the beginning, tables that are within 8 feet of a opening of a wall that is open more than 50%, that is considered outdoor, and that counts as separate than your indoor capacity. So that may still continue. The outdoor service where you have people up near a wall, that can and still should continue. In addition, bars, taverns, and breweries can now open at 25% capacity indoors. 2 additional regulations specifically for bars, taverns, and breweries, only places that don't serve food. They must ensure that food is available for purchase at all times that the establishment is open. What does this mean? This is a very simply means that anybody in your establishment must have the ability to order and to get food in some capacity, to bring it in, to have it delivered, to order it through an app, and be able to eat on your premise. Doesn't mean that everybody needs to eat, but it does mean that food must be available. This can be done by directing people to use a third-party delivery app and allowing delivery to that location. You could have menus available. We recommend that folks partner with, a neighborhood pizza shop or something like that, so that food can be purchased and is available to all of your patrons. Additionally, again, this is something specific for bars, taverns, and breweries that don't serve food. Patrons must remain seated when eating, drinking, and ordering. So that means they cannot approach the bar. We are very worried as we open up bars and taverns that we're going to have congregating around the bar. So they cannot approach the bar to order. However, they can sit at the bar. You can sit at the bar, but you cannot approach the bar to order. So you can sit at the bar, but patrons need to be 6 feet apart. And I recommend that you look at the full regulations specifically for food service and bars for what the bar rules are. But essentially, and the reason for this is a lot of neighborhood taverns only, for example, have a bartender and typically have people go up to the bar to order from their seat. That is no longer okay. You need to be seated at your seat while you're ordering. No going up to the bar. Again, only at establishments that do not serve food. I see a couple questions come in related to this inside tables by the open windows. So if you are at an inside table that is by an open window, again, that is considered outdoors. That means it does not count towards your indoor capacity, provided, again, that those windows are open. We know that we're getting cold. You can't just say, I have open windows, they're closed today. They need to actually be open at above and make it so the wall is at above, is open more than 50%. That counts as outdoor service and does not count as indoor capacity. Okay. Next, third new regulation. There is now extended hours for bars and restaurants. Any establishment that serves alcohol, either for on-site or any bar or restaurant that serves alcohol for on-site consumption, may now sell alcohol either for on-site or off-site consumption until 1 a.m. So if you have a tavern or a consumption on premises incidental activity license, for example, you will now be able to serve alcohol until 1 a.m. and you may remain open until 1:30 a.m. I meant to flag this. Let me take a quick step back and talk about the capacity. And I should have flagged this for everyone originally. Let me be clear about some capacity questions that we're getting. While you are now allowed to open at 40% capacity or 25% capacity at bars, the 6 feet rule between tables must still be followed. Again, you still must have 6 feet between tables and you still must have no more than 6 people at a table. So if 40% capacity would make it so your tables cannot be 6 feet apart, then that is not okay. So you may not be over the capacity limits, but you are breaking other social distancing rules as a part of phase 4. So I meant to mention that when I went through this first, and I just want to reiterate and stress 6 feet between tables is still in effect. That does not supersede 40% capacity. Sorry, I meant to mention that earlier. So extended hours for bars and restaurants. If you have a tavern or a consumption on premises incidental activity license, you may now sell alcohol for until 1 a.m. and stay open until 1:30 a.m. So this means both alcohol for on-site consumption or off-site consumption. Last call is at 1 a.m. You can stay open until 1:30. Importantly, please don't say, oh, I now have a green light to operate my beer garden until 1:30, or my sidewalk cafe until 1:30, or my expanded outdoor dining area until 1:30. This is for indoor service only. There are existing rules separate from COVID-19 about outdoor patios, sidewalk cafes, or expanded outdoor dining areas. You still must close those at the required time. So sidewalk cafes, I believe, are typically open until midnight, though some permits may have different things in place. Outdoor patios, depending on the area, depending on the day, are either open till 11 a.m. or midnight. Expanded outdoor dining permits are typically 11, but some may be earlier. Those still must close at their required time. They cannot stay open till 1. This is regardless of COVID, this is the rule. So the open until 1 a.m. is just for indoor service only. Liquor stores, grocery stores, and other establishments that sell alcohol to go with a packaged goods license must still cease alcohol sales at 9. This is really just a strong reminder, but when you dine out at a food service establishment or bar, you must always wear face coverings when seated, except when you are actively eating or drinking. So this is a slight tweak to the existing regulation. This means anytime you are seated, and if you are not actively eating or drinking, then you need to have your face covering out, even as you are waiting for your food, for example. You must have your face covering on, especially and critically when your waiter or waitress comes, takes your order, drops your food off, things like that. People are required to put their face covering back on. Finally, and this is a requirement, I saw a couple questions come through. For restaurants and bars, when you are taking reservations and seating walk-in customers, you're now required to retain an email and or a phone number for possible contact tracing. This is just to help mitigate risk as we are reopening. So you should be you're now required to retain an email and or phone number. Great. So I see a couple questions come through related to restaurants and bars. I'm going to take a quick break to answer a couple of those questions before getting more into fitness centers and personal services. Great question. Does contact information need to be obtained for each member of the party? As long as you have contact information for somebody from the party, that would suffice. Got questions about restaurant and hotels capacity that have already been at 50 people. Again, if you are already at 50 people, then you cannot extend beyond 50 people. So it's 40% or 50 people, whichever is fewer. So a little bit of clarifications here on the sales for off-site versus on-site information. On-site versus off-site consumption. If you are a bar or a restaurant or a tavern or a brewery, any place that has either a tavern or a consumption on premises incidental activity license, you can now sell alcohol on-site or off-site until 1 o'clock a.m. Again, so that means a bar or a tavern or a restaurant that wants to sell cocktails to go in prepackaged and tamper-evident containers or beer to go, they can now do that until 1 a.m. Establishments that have a packaged goods license, liquor stores, grocery stores, etc., they must stop at 9 p.m. So a great question. What about cocktails to go being ordered at the bar? If you have somebody coming into your bar just to get takeout or to get to-go cocktails, things like that, that can be ordered from the bar, provided that you are maintaining 6 feet of social distance. Okay. If you are a coffee shop, for example, if you have customers who are almost always walk-ins, we do want people to start gathering this information, to start gathering email and or phone numbers. If people are just coming for takeout, things like that, then it would not be required. A couple additional questions coming through. I just want to clarify again that you can sit at the bar. The patrons cannot approach the bar in order to order. Great. I see a couple additional questions come through related to some of these specific things. I do have a couple more slides related to this that I will cover, and I will answer those questions if I did not get to them at the end. Next new regulation is increased group size. Maximum indoor group size for health and fitness classes and after-school programming will increase from 10 to 15 people. Let me be clear though, capacity must still be limited to 40% and 6 feet of social distancing. 6 feet of social distancing must be maintained. So some spaces, some classes may not be able to increase to 15 people because the capacity limit of 40% or the social distancing does not need to be, it is not possible to be maintained. And again, masks must be worn at all times. Lastly, expanded personal services. Facials, shaves, and other personal services that require the removal of face coverings will now be allowed. We are recommending that you limit service, however, to no more than 15 minutes in order to limit exposure. Okay. So I wanted to throw on a little bit of a quick 2 charts to provide an overview of how indoor capacity is changing. So bars without a retail food license going from closed to 25% or 50 per space. Restaurants going from 25% to 40%, still limited at 50 per space. Childcare is still at 15 per group. After-school programs going from 10 per group to 15 per group. Health and fitness centers going from 25% to 40%. We still recommend 50 people per space, per different location within the facility. And classes can go from 10 to 15. Again, keeping within that 40% capacity. Again, these first ones here, commercial and residential building gathering spaces, hotels, indoor recreations, museums, personal services, retail stores, going from 25% to 40% capacity within, still limited to 50 people per gathering space, per common area. Event venues, higher education classrooms, performance venues, places of worship, going from 25% to 40%, limited again to 50 people per space. See a couple additional questions come through. I'm going to cover a couple main industries very quickly, just to provide an overview of the regulations for that industry, and to highlight specifically in red the items that are that have changed. So again, I've said it a few times now, indoor service is up to 40%, still max at 50, while bars, taverns, breweries without a retail food license can go up to 25%. Face coverings must be worn by customers and employees except when eating or drinking. I want to reiterate this point again. All patrons must be seated while they are eating or drinking. This is at bars, restaurants, taverns, breweries, any place, coffee shops. There's no standing and eating or drinking. You must be seated. Additionally, if the establishment does not have a retail food license, you cannot go to the bar to order. Again, want to reiterate, tables must be 6 feet apart with no more than 6 people per table. And this is an existing rule. If you do not have food, you should be party. Establishments may serve alcohol indoors until 1 a.m. and must close by 1:30. Outdoor service must still end at the time associated with your license or permit. And again, I've covered most of this again, but cocktails to go must be sold in a sealed and tamper-evident containers. Anytime, this is now a new rule again for restaurants and bars, any place that serves food, when you're seating walk-in customers or taking reservations, you should be retaining an email or a phone number for possible contact tracing. Now, I'm seeing a number of kind of specific questions related to this, and I do understand that there may be some challenges to this for certain types of businesses. If you can just reach out to us for specific types of businesses, we can help get some clarification on that. We understand that some establishments, it may be a little bit more challenging, but we will I can provide some guidance on that if you guys can reach out via email. So a quick point I want to reiterate about capacity. 40% capacity for restaurants or a bar that serves food, and 25% capacity for a tavern, brewery, bar that does not serve food. So I know we get a lot of questions about how to calculate capacity. The vast majority of bars, taverns, restaurants will have an occupancy placard. And if that's the case, simply take 40% of your occupancy placards to determine your capacity. However, if you do not have an occupancy placard, here is our general recommendation. Typically, we say 15 square feet per person at a bar or a restaurant. Now then, we would say 37.5 square feet per person, which would be 40% capacity. So that means take your square footage and divide it by 37.5. Take your square footage, divide it by 37.5, and that is how you would determine 40% at a bar or restaurant. Okay. For personal services, it is now also at 40% indoor capacity. The way you calculate capacity for personal services, and this is also the same for office capacity, is that you take your square footage and you divide that by 50. So take your square footage. Sorry, I misspoke. You take your square footage and divide it by 250. Personal services are a little bit more limited, and office capacity, typically it's 100 square feet per people. Now it's 250 square feet per person. So you take your square footage and divide it by 250. And then here's a reminder of all of the personal services regulations. Face coverings must be worn by all employees and customers, except during services that require their removal, such as facials or beard shapes. So this does not mean now that face coverings can be fully removed for personal services. It is still very important that they are worn at all other times, except when they are required to be removed for a service, such as facials or beard shapes. Our recommendation is to keep these services under 15 minutes. Health and fitness centers. Indoor activity can now again be provided at 40% capacity. Indoor class limit to no more than 15 people. However, you still must be 6 feet apart and you must be at 40% capacity. So if your space can only fit 12 at 40% capacity with 6 feet of social distancing, then you must limit it to that 12. You cannot go over. Pools can now open at 40% capacity indoors. Remember, anything that was at 25% is now at 40%. The way you calculate health and fitness centers capacity, again, most large gyms will have an occupancy placard. If that is the case, simply take your occupancy and divide it by 2.5, multiply it by 40%. So for health and fitness centers, open floor spaces such as aerobic rooms, it is now 50 square feet per person, meaning that you divide your capacity by 50, to determine, or you divide your square footage by 50 in order to determine that capacity. Next. I do want to remind folks that BACP has been and will continue to be enforcing this. We have to date conducted 2,109 investigations and cited 142 businesses. Let me be clear about this. Those are really good numbers. Most of these investigations are either proactive investigations specifically in high density entertainment districts, or these are in response to complaints. So the fact is, we've conducted over 2,000 investigations and only cited about 6% of businesses from those investigations. And this is not just from overall proactive canvas. The majority of those are from complaints, which is, again, a very good sign that businesses have been doing a wonderful job following the guidelines. However, now is not the time to take our foot off the gas pedal. Now is the time to double down even more on our requirements. So I do just want to emphasize that this is something that we have been and will continue to enforce. Finally, I'm going to open it up for a series of questions for our last 5 minutes, but I do want to make it clear that we will be having additional industry-specific webinars today and tomorrow. I'm going to lose my voice by the end of the day tomorrow, but we will have personal services webinar in about 50 minutes at 2:30 today, a health and fitness centers webinar today at 3:30. Tomorrow at 1, we will have one specifically on food service and bars. So if I did not get to your questions on food service and bars, if you have any other questions, you can join me at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And then we'll do event and performance venues tomorrow at 2:30, and then retail tomorrow at 3:30. So if you have any, today was an overview, and I know there was a lot of information. Today was an overview of all of the new guidelines, but these next 5 webinars will be specific on specific industries. And I'll leave this slide up to remind folks of additional webinars. I'm going to now take a minute to answer a couple additional questions. Couple additional questions now. So I saw questions related to how many people can sit together at a bar. So we typically treat sitting at a bar the same way we would sitting at a table. So tables are limited to no more than 6 people, which means groups at a bar, people sitting within 6 feet of each other, should be at no more than 6. You cannot have a group of 15 people all sitting next to each other at the bar. And you must then maintain 6 feet of social distancing between different groups. So again, you can have people within one party come and sit with each other at a bar, but you must have 6 feet of social distancing between them and other folks. So our question is, there talk of increasing the 50-person cap? That is certainly something that we're looking closely at. It is something that is potentially in the future, but I do know that the health department has made clear we do need to get those numbers down, particularly that case rate down. And the reason for this, I'm not the health expert, so I don't want to say anything wrong. And if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to get answers from the health department. But the reason for that 50-person cap is really the math. It's really the numbers. And it's the likelihood of somebody having COVID-19 within a group of people. And the bigger that group is, the higher the likelihood is that somebody has COVID. So while our case rate is still relatively high, it's still at about 300 cases a day, we are very hesitant to increase that total number, because when we increase that number and we have a relatively high case rate, then we are concerned about people having COVID within there. Had a question about considering changing the group size to be based on occupancy instead of a static number of 15. That is certainly something I'll bring that recommendation back to the health department. Again, we look at these every day. I know that we wanted to keep the numbers down within fitness classes just because there's additional possibility for transmission there. So I will pass that question on to the health department. Had a question about addressing regulations specific to office environments. Now, we do not have a webinar specifically addressing office environments, but I'm happy to answer specific questions. You can email us at bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. We'll be happy to get your questions answered. Great question. Is it mandatory for restaurants to take reservations with no walk-ins allowed? No, it is not mandatory for restaurants to take reservations. It's not mandatory at this point for any establishment to take reservations, but we do still strongly recommend reservations in order to keep congregating down, but it is not mandatory. Are bars required to have plexiglass set up at the bar for customers sitting? No, that is not a requirement. It is something that, again, we would strongly recommend. You should be maintaining 6 feet of social distancing. So if that's too hard to do for the bartender, then we do recommend that you have plexiglass, but it is not a requirement. Okay. Just wanted to clarify, yes, an establishment that has a bar, restaurant, tavern, brewery, if they have a consumption on premises or tavern license, they can sell alcohol to go until 1 a.m. Again, I've seen a couple questions come through about some details on this contact information. I do understand that there is some points of clarification here, and so please do send us an email to BACP Outreach or join our food service and bars webinar tomorrow, and I'll provide a little bit more detail, get a little bit more clarification for everybody that has questions related to the contact information requirement. So I want to confirm a couple points with our health department, and I will cover that on the food service and bars webinar tomorrow, or you can email us at BACP Outreach. Question, 50 people, this person asked, a 50-person limit used to say per floor, and now it says per area or per room. Does that mean you can have 50 in each private room and 50 in a bar area, assuming that you keep 6 feet of social distancing? So let me clarify, this has been a regulation throughout since we've had any indoor dining or drinking. That requirement is no more than 50 people per floor or room or space. So if you have entirely separate rooms, then you can have up to 50 people, provided that you are maintaining that 40% capacity and 6 feet of social distancing within each of those spaces. I had a couple questions about youth activities. Unfortunately, we do not have a webinar specifically covering youth activities. Be happy to answer questions via email, however. And if we do get a number of questions, we're happy to schedule. I do appreciate those questions coming in. We kind of have focused our webinars more on the businesses that BACP more regularly regulates. However, if we get a number of questions, we'll be happy to add webinars later this week. So please do let me know if you have specific questions there. Great. Again, I do see a couple additional questions related to the getting contact information, things like that. Again, please do follow up via email or join our webinar tomorrow, specifically on food service and bars. We're a little bit over time. I want to thank you all for joining. I also want to reiterate and say again, and thank all of you for your diligence in following these guidelines. We would not, I know it's been an incredibly challenging last few months, but I know that we would not have been able to get to this point, to get to this announcement on that we announced yesterday without the hard work of so many bars, restaurants, gyms, barbershops, et cetera, businesses that are doing really a wonderful job. I know every place that I've been out to across the board has been doing a great job following the rules. And I just plead with all of you to keep doing so. We can't, you know as well as I, we really do not want to have to backtrack. So please keep up all the good work with that. Last reminder, these new regulations come in on Thursday at 5 a.m. Again, Thursday at 5 a.m. That means you cannot be open until 1 a.m. Thursday morning. Thursday at 5 a.m. is when these come into effect. So thank you all for joining. Please join one of our additional webinars later this week for more specific guidance on specific industries. Thank you, everyone.